Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habīb. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who are not sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine God, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, Brahman, Great Spirit, higher power, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true selves, to our source, to the light that each of us carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introduction of our conversation partner for this episode, Thomas Attig. Thomas is an applied philosopher and revolutionary voice in grief studies. Tom is the author of How We Grieve, Relearning the World, and The Heart of Grief, Catching Your Breath in Grief. His new collection, Seeking Wisdom in Death's Shadows, collected writings on how we grieve, distills a lifetime of listening, reflection, and teaching into understanding and guidance for those who are mourning, for those who are caregivers, for counselors. To learn more about Tom and his work, please visit griefsheart.com. So that's GRIEFS heart, HEART.com. Tom, welcome. Thank you for being here. I gave you a warning that I start every episode with the same question, which is if you would please introduce yourself to the listeners by sharing your spiritual story. Of course, to the extent that you're comfortable and to the length, as short or long as you'd like to make it, that you're comfortable.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
Absolutely.
for that introduction. Um, I'm caught a little bit by surprise on the question, and I'm wondering how I really do think of myself. Um, I was raised by a quite zealous conservative Christian mother
Mm-hmm.
and a father who couldn't be dragged into a church at gunpoint. Um, And mom was pretty severe in her beliefs, and we spent her funeral listening to the minister ignoring the grieving persons in the auditorium who were
Mm-hmm.
listening to him in their sorrow. That did not matter to him at all. My brother and I went to introduce him to our mother. He was a new minister, and he said, "In this church, we know what to do. And I don't need to know about your mother." And we had a kind of fire and brimstone sort of sermon delivered to us about how
Mm-hmm.
our mother was in a better place. And if we ever wanted to see her again, we had to believe as she did, or it wouldn't happen. I
Right.
had warned my brother that we were going to have a not very pleasant service, but we were going to meet with our family and friends afterwards at my Uncle Dick's house, and we'll have a good time there, and we'll remember mom and remember her well, which
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what happened. I actually wrote about him in one of the pieces that I've written as practicing spiritual malpractice. Uh, it's not something I think anybody should do to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Call uh, their salvation into question in a circumstance where they're in the midst of heartache, having lost a loved one. I had been disenchanted by my mother's church many years before and
Mm-hmm.
had left church behind.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe the metaphysical claims and became a philosophy professor,
Mm-hmm.
um, still interested in what kinds of creatures we are and what the possibilities for living a meaningful life are, and so on. And I went for years and years, and about 15, about 18 years ago now, my wife and I, second wife, we decided to try church and see what church was like. And
Hmm.
we signed on as Christians in what I would call a very liberal kind of Christian church, not as doctrinaire as that one had been for my mother.
Hmm.
And we found it a place where you can reflect on who you are and why you are and where you are headed. And we found good community there. Um, as I think of how I think of spirituality, um, in one of the chapters in my book, I wrote about the contrast between spirituality and religion,
Hmm.
as I understand it. And I think I'm not much of a subscriber to traditional religious beliefs of
Hmm.
any kind, although I I can see a point in being very respectful of and appreciative of and a bit mystified by um, the origin of our being.
Hmm.
Um, I think that spirituality has to do with searching for meaning where you can find it. And I think it's meaning in two senses. Meaning in the sense of understanding complex sentences about the nature of things, uh, beliefs and belief structures and so on, and finding meaning in life. And by meaning in life, I mean good reasons for affirming the value of living and what it's possible for beings like us with the capacities that we have to find meaning in community, in love, in giving, in um, humility, in gratitude. Um, those are spiritual matters for me, and
Hmm.
I found reasons for um, living in the quest of those things and in satisfaction at having found them in lots of places. And
Hmm.
I see religion as a cultural phenomena, quite different over the face of the earth, where many people find in religion and in religious teachings um, means to recognize, understand, and devote themselves to those meanings that I would call spiritual. And I find lots of people are put off by religion. And I think lots of things culturally have been done that have been harmful rather than blessings for the people who turn in their direction.
Hmm.
Is that enough?
Sure, as you like. Thank you for sharing that and for your honesty. You're being quite candid about your experience of your mother's church and your mother's belief and this particular pastor at her funeral.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
yeah.
I can relate. I grew up in a very conservative, exclusivist Christian church, and I too left that church. Uh, and and I think this will be an interesting point of connection between your focus on grief and your meaning for spirituality being centered around um, a search for meaning, the meaning of life, finding the value of life, finding the values that constitute that, uh, and living in pursuit of that. Also, you mentioned specifically part of that use of that orientation of where am I, why am I here and where am I going as being part of that, an important part of that journey. And in my case, it was my father died when I was still in college. He was struck by lightning, so it was quite a surprise. Um, I had one older one sibling, an older brother, who struggled with drug addiction and alcoholism and committed suicide
Oh,
uh,
I'm sorry.
shortly after college. And then, um, uh, not, I mean, maybe, I don't know how many years later. I guess I was probably in my early 30s, then my mother died of cancer.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, it's just me. It's just me. So that really prompted me to say, well, okay, where am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? Where am I going? Like, because I just had this awareness of, yeah, something about my life is not working. And I don't know that I would have really um had that kind of opening to
Mm.
start asking questions and that opening to a search for meaning had I not had these losses, the death of everyone in my immediate family. So
Mm.
let's let that be a segue into you talking about the experience of death and the experience of grief and how that relates to spirituality, a search for meaning, how we establish meaning for our lives and value our lives, and what we are, um, what that, what you have found in your lifetime of research, what that invites us to.
Well, I started teaching because there was a new college of health and human services on the campus where I'd been hired a couple of years before. This was the beginning of my teaching career. And I'd been trained in phenomenology and existentialism, phenomenology being a kind of philosophy and philosophical inquiry that involves both describing and interpreting the full range of human experiences. Anything that we experience is fair game. And existentialism, which focuses on my understanding on the challenges and how to meet the challenges of living a finite life, which is what is available to us, with integrity and meaning. So there's a kind of a disposition to being um, spiritual in that broadest sense in which I was describing things
Mhm.
to you, as opposed to in the sectarian kind of sense of spiritual. Um, and I started teaching about grief and loss because the college was setting up a new college on campus focused on health and human services with programs in nursing, gerontology, social work, and child and family development, among a couple of others. And I'd been teaching an ethics class for a while. The other members of my philosophy department were beginning to teach what I call applied philosophy, and we called it that, looking at real world problems and how to think about and address them responsibly and intelligently. And I saw it looks as if we could have a course on death and dying in this
Mhm.
department. I had never thought that I would ever teach a course on death and dying, but it just looked like a natural. And people had been uh, in my classes selecting death related ethical issues that they wanted to talk about, like abortion and suicide and killing in war and the
Mhm.
like. And I thought, well, I could teach a death ethics kind of class.
Mhm.
And they gave me the go ahead to teach such a course. And I thought seriously about what are my students really going to need.
Mhm.
And I thought they will rarely be addressing ethical classes or issues in their day to day work, but they will always be daunted by going into the room of a person who's dying or
Mhm.
facing a brother or sister of someone who is dying and trying to be helpful in some way or another. And I thought I should teach about that. And then I thought about how to do that. And I thought what I'm really going to be asking my students to do is to reflect very much on their own views and their own experiences of facing death and dying
Hmm.
and feeling helpless in a room where someone's dying or feeling like they really had something to offer. So I decided I would have my students write a lot of self-reflective exercises, thinking about
Hmm.
aspects of their lives. And one of them was asking them to write about their three most important loss experiences. And I wanted them to talk about what it was like when they first learned about their losing. Um,
Hmm.
and second, what it was like when it was at its worst. And third, what was it like when it felt like you were coming out of it? Not that you had it all behind you or anything like that, but you felt like the worst was past. What were some of the things that helped you get past the worst of it?
Hmm.
And they wrote hundreds of these things in the first years I was teaching the course. And amazingly, no one ever mentioned 5 stages of grief. There wasn't a single person who talked about a single stage of what they were experiencing. They talked
Hmm.
about how the world was different. They didn't know what to do with the stuff left in the closet. They
Hmm.
didn't know how to clean up what had happened in the dining room when he fell and died. They didn't know how to talk to grandma. Grandma's son, their father, had just died, and they felt like they really needed to talk to somebody. But how am I going to talk to grandma? She's just lost her son.
Yeah.
Um, they talked about going to church or not going to church. Um, they talked about the difficulty of walking in some of their neighborhoods because it was filled with memories of this person who had died. They talked about conversations with some people, but not others. They talked, well, one young man talked about how he came into the living room of his home one day and his father was there with a gun in his hand intending to kill himself. And
Mm.
that young man wrestled the gun out of his father's hand. That was one of his first experiences. They were all different. Nobody sounded even remotely alike as they described it. It was all particular, particular life circumstances, particular daily lives that were upset, and particular trajectories in life that were sort of knocked off course by what had happened. I began thinking, I began writing in response to them. One of the very first things I wrote was on what I call the phenomenology of grieving, relearning the world, and talked about how you wind up relearning how to live in your daily life. A major character is now missing, and it's going to make lots of differences in all kinds of aspects of your life. And in the same light, it means that the trajectory of your life into the next chapters will be into different chapters because a major character you expected to be there will not be there.
Hmm.
I fed this back to my students. They said, that's it. I've never read anybody talking about grief and saying such sensible things. But that's what it's like. My world has changed, and I feel uh, daunted, frightened, puzzled, confused, overwhelmed, hurting terribly. And I guess I learned how to live in the world before, but this is new. And this is bigger than anything I've ever faced. And they found me echoing their experiences, and I thought, I'm on to something. And I
Hmm.
got serious, and eventually I wrote my first book on how we grieve that came
Hmm.
out about 10 years after, well, almost 15 years after I had begun teaching. Well, actually, 20 years after I had begun teaching. I've been doing this a long time. I'm as old as Methuselah, if you know.
Maybe
Anyway,
not quite that old.
yeah, so that's how I got into it and how I came to um, what I'm known for is that thinking of grieving as learning how to relearning how to live in a
Mhm.
world that's profoundly changed by what's happened. And what you described was a series of profound changes in your life lumped into a pretty short period of time, which can be overwhelming. I'm amazing you're standing.
Well, I was very fortunate in many ways in that uh, I had made the decision to. I think when I finished undergraduate, I thought that I was going to continue in graduate school, and my experience in graduate school involved a little bit of disillusionment with the academic environment. And so I took
Easy.
those tests, like the Myers-Briggs and so on. And just made the decision to go to work in human services, like made the decision that based on, all these things that I know I am learning about myself, perhaps what I should do is go to work in the human services field. And so I was working in the field of long-term care for the state, and had just come across a study that people in late stages of life who find themselves um, the happiest,
Mhm.
spirituality is a strong component of their life.
There you go.
And so then that prompted me to say, well, what is spirituality? Because at that point, I really had no concept of what the word meant, what was associated with it. It just didn't have a resonance for me at that time.
Hmm.
So I was quite fortunate that had happened shortly before my mother's death, and then when I came back to work after my mother's death, the I started working with another person uh, who was going through big life changes in her own life and was finding herself exposed to Sufism at the same time.
Hmm.
And so when I heard this Sufi sheikh say, and my listeners have heard me say this before, but this is the first time you'll hear me say this, is when I heard the Sufi sheikh say, those who know their religion well, so whether the person who is Christian or the person is Jewish or the person is Muslim, those who know their religion as well, know their religions well, know that there is only one religion, and that's the religion of love and peace and mercy and justice and freedom for all without separation.
Amen.
And when
Yeah.
I heard that, I thought, oh,
Yeah.
this hits my heart much differently than my experience of the church that I grew up in.
Oh, yeah.
And so I wanted to learn more. And so that embarked me on doing spiritual practices that really gave me um, a sense of strengthening, a sense of peace, a sense of calm that I would not have had otherwise.
Mhm.
So it was, I approached it in my beginning experience of spirituality, I approached it like a science experiment. Like, I'm going to try this and see what happens. But then what
Mhm.
happened as a result of that was that faith sort of snuck up on me. And I realized before long, oh, I'm doing all of these in my case because Sufism is the mystical path of Islam. I
Mhm.
realized without conscious realization, but I was like, initially. And then at some point later, I realized, oh, I have in fact been observing all of the outer pillars of Islam without even really associating it with Islam or associating it with religion. I've
Yeah.
just been associating with it with this um, inner experience of love, this inner experience of connection, this inner experience of unity. And wanting more tastes of that, more tastes
Mhm.
of the love. Uh, so I
I've
was
had
very
similar
fortunate.
longings. Right.
I'm sorry.
I've had similar longings and found bits of it in some institutions that I've
Mm,
connected with, and more of it in individuals who seem to have their head on straight and recognize the significance of good and bad experiences that they've had and have pretty
mm,
good judgment about
yeah.
where their alliances should be, where their compassion and love should be invested, and hazards to avoid.
hmm hmm I will also say that I was fortunate in that, and I'm curious to hear how you'll react to this. But after the death of each of my immediate family, um, they visited me in my dreams for a period of time.
Hmm.
Um, and my father was very devoted to his religion.
Hmm.
Um, and yet I think maybe I was going to speak to his shortcomings, but I think maybe I think I'll leave that unsaid. But what I'll say is that for each family member, I received the gift of them visiting me in spirit, in
Hmm.
dreams, and giving me a glimpse of who they are in their truth, in their deepest truth, in their essence. Um,
You were a privileged man. That's good.
yeah,
There are people have those experiences all over the world, but not uniformly. And the real deal is really reassuring. Good for you.
yeah. And it helps you think, oh, it helps you have a different perspective in relating to other human beings. Because you realize when you're looking at a person
Hmm.
that you're not seeing their essence
Hmm.
unless you unless you really intend to do that. And in my case, have the ability to
Hmm.
for me, in the paradigm that I operate in, it's a matter of letting my mind bow to my heart and allowing my heart to be in connection to the divine and
Hmm.
allowing myself to be present with someone that is a much deeper way of being present than how we typically interact in our daily lives. And it's
Hmm.
only through that sense of alignment with the divine and that deeper sense of connection and presence that it was able to get a sense of who someone is in their deepest truth. But
Hmm.
it's those dreams invited me to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're a gift.
Yes, they're a gift. Yeah. So I know people, I have loved ones who are currently dealing with grief. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think, grief is something that hits us all, whether we um, find ourselves grounded in a particular tradition or not, whether we consider ourselves spiritual but not religious or not, that there is certain um, commonality of the grief experience and that we're not exempt from death and dying. Um, so, what invitation did you have somebody who's going through that that would help someone bring their experience of grief um, to allow them to grow in terms of this journey of where am I now? Why am I here? Where am I going?
That's, I'm sort of at a loss as to where to begin. Um,
Hmm.
I think that typically when you end up talking to someone who's in the midst of grief, the focus is first, usually, on the sorrow that comes over you,
Hmm.
the sense of loss and deprivation, and just the weight of it, the enormity of it. This is not another small thing. It's not a problem that you can solve, put on the shelf, and move somewhere else. You're contending with a mystery. If you're solving problems, you're changing the world around you. if you're contending with a mystery, you are having to change in response to something that is weighty enough that moves you to recognize that you can't undo this, but it's more significant than a daily problem. It has to do with why you want to live anymore and for what reasons, um, for what values, what matters to you most. And I think that a good part of what I've been trying to do for years is to help people move from sadness and the weight of feelings of loss
Mm-hmm.
to gratitude. Um, I was lucky to know this person. I was lucky to be loved by this person. I was lovely to be I was lucky to be raised by these people. I was lucky to be taught by this man. I was lucky in so many ways to be given things that I had nothing to do with discovering, creating, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, that a key to living well is to recognizing how little you really do to make your life what it is, to fill it with what it's filled with. You are given from the time you're born the means to live, and you don't have the means to gathering it for yourself. It's given to you from the people who first feed you and clothe you and house you. And then as you grow into life, you meet up with friends, you meet up with other relatives in your family, you meet up with people who teach you, you meet up with people who guide you, you meet up with the product of others' loves and labors that are in your life there, and you've been given them. And when you really get to it, you get to the point of seeing that we're all in a vast web of webs where everything is connected to absolutely everything. And we're far from being isolated atoms floating freely in open space. And when someone dies, the space hasn't changed except the one being is missing in it, and you haven't been changed at all. But what's really happening is you are a web within a great web of webs, and you have been fed along lifelines beyond counting and beyond even knowing that have made it possible for you to have the life that you have. And a time when someone is dying or has died is a perfect time to reflect on what you had in your life because this person lived. And to move from the heartache of missing them now to uh, the gratitude in continuing to love them and appreciating what they gave to you, that's still part of who you are. Um, and I've been moved in that direction as I've been studying this for years and years. I mean, there are little quotations. I can't remember them exactly, but you know, the 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 gifts given to you by others are yours for the rest of your life. And the more time you can spend appreciating them, making good use of them, and so on, the better person you will be and the better life you're going to live. Um, Studying this stuff for 40 or 50 years has driven me in that direction. And uh, we are the product of a universe that is put together beyond our understanding and rich with abundance of all kinds. And we get small bites that are sufficient for meaningful lifetimes. And it better be okay that we're small and insignificant because we are, and it better be okay that suffering's okay, because we suffer and we will. And it better be okay that we don't understand fully, because we never will. And it better be okay that change is probably the only constant in life,
Mm,
because that's the way it is. Um, and I don't know, it's from philosophy, it's from religious influence, it's from whatever influence or stories that I've come to know in my lifetime that I've sort of distilled out that kind of an understanding. And you can call it religious if you want. I have a little bit of difficulty doing that because I associate that with the formalities of doctrines and so on. But
right.
if there were a religion that centered on what I've just been talking about, I'd be a religious person.
Mm.
Most of them aren't.
Well, I don't know that this is the time or place to get into the discussion of religion versus spirituality. There have been other episodes with that's more a central point of
Yeah.
the discussion. I'll just say from my own experience, I think of I heard the idea that true religion is to return you to your origin.
Mm,
So it's like a roadway um, with guideposts or with guideposts or guardrails. It's to help you to get where you're going. Um,
mhm.
and if it's not doing that, you know, if it's not taking you to love, if it's not taking you to peace, if it's not taking you to mercy and compassion and justice, then something's off.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, part of what's necessary is to have a forgiving mind, because it's humans who are telling the stories and promulgating the faith, and so on. And um, we're imperfect, and we all have to contend with imperfections in ourselves and others our entire lives. And the imperfections can get in the way of seeing things that probably have to um, be seen more constantly and carefully, but it's hard to
right.
do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, setting the whole religion versus spirituality discussion aside, I just
Mhm.
want to offer our um, listeners a recap, if I may. Hopefully,
Mhm.
this is helpful. But the things that I heard you say that are keys to living well. One is gratitude. If you can be grateful that the loved one was in your life and can be grateful for the what you received by having that loved one in your life. Um, and a general sort of gratitude in addition to that. Number two would be, and maybe you would separate this, maybe this is just, maybe not, maybe it's just how I heard it, but I heard you're speaking to an acknowledgement or an awareness of that so much of our life we are given from the moment of conception in in my paradigm in spiritual tradition we believe that the sperm and the egg is joined by an angel like that there is the holy presence of love from
Mhm.
the very beginning. But
Mhm.
that joining does not happen without angelic presence. So but that's not specifically what you're saying, but that you invited me to think of that in my own tradition because you're inviting this awareness of how much we are given, whether it's the air or the water or
Yeah.
that
I
yes,
mean, there is a reason that within a lot of traditions there's talk about providence, because
right,
providence is sort of being givenness. That is our state of being. And we are on the receiving end of, I mean, having a moment alive the way we are alive. It's spectacularly out of the ordinary for physical stuff. Uh, we're, we are uh, enriched beyond measure just by having been granted by whatever mystery we conjure up, uh, a setup of the way things are that enables us to breathe, to think, to see, to hear, to love,
Yeah.
to hurt, to hunger, to feed, to
Yeah.
give, to receive. Um, and if we had that for 15 minutes, that'd be spectacular enough, but we get to live whole lifetimes. I
Yeah.
mean, how is it possible? Does anybody know how inert matter becomes enlivened in a way that we can understand? I mean, and these tiny little things, these zygotes that sort of meet up inside the woman and eventually
Right.
become bodies that emerge, that's a very complex process. But
Right.
how it becomes alive, we don't understand very well.
No, we
You know,
don't.
it
Yeah.
strikes me as miraculous. It's just
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. So that reminds me of one of the other things that I took from your offering of keys to living well is awareness of the mystery and acceptance of the mystery, and acceptance of the unknown, also acceptance of change, accept,
Mhm,
acceptance of the um, you mentioned the word insignificance. To me, hearing you talk about the miracle of life and that how
mhm,
sacred life is, how holy and precious life is, there's both this sense of this expansiveness of the miracle, the wonder, the
mhm.
expansive wonder, and the awareness of our insignificance in in consideration of the whole. Um,
Yeah, and in proportion to the size of things and just physical size and physical energy and physical this, that, and the other thing, and then throw
right,
in about 20 other dimensions that can't be measured with measuring rods and uh, thermometers and the like. But it's all so vast. And here
yes,
we are on what may be a very, very tiny corner of this vastness that is the only corner that's like it, or there may be remote corners innumerable that are so remote from us that we can't even detect that they're there. Uh, this is a big universe, and figuring out how to even time when it started uh, and the scale of it is they measure it in light years, which is how long it takes a year of light traveling as fast as it travels. Uh, and it's not 2 or 3 light years, it's a gazillion of these. This is a big place.
yeah, yes, yeah, yes. The, in Sufism, there's a name, the divine name, a name for God that's associated with the God's greatness. And and in explanation, one of the explanations that I've heard of this divine name that refers to the greatness, the vastness of God, is if you were in a vehicle that traveled the speed of thought and you traveled past 1 million suns,
Mhm.
you would still only get a glimpse of the creation.
Yeah.
So, how much greater is the creator? So, I know that's not necessarily what you were saying, but I just am pointing out the
Oh, yeah.
places of resonance between what
Yeah.
you're offering and my own tradition.
Well, and there are similarities, um, um, themes, um, that I think and alternative expressions or attempts to express the ineffable in
Right.
the languages that religions find for themselves, and they seem to be stretching into the same inscrutable substance that shapes the context where we all live.
Yes. Yes. The great mystery is the term that the term that comes to mind. Yes.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah. I'm also reminded that one of the ways you talked about the similar expressions, one of the other things that I got from your offerings of a key to living well is our connectedness, this sense of our inner connection.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's there are things that scientists have been doing since they've been doing what they do, um, that um, just missed the mark on how connected everything is to everything else.
yeah,
And what they seem to be wanting to do is to break it down to the smallest particles, rather than to realize and value and understand the depth of and the richness of the interconnected between everything and everything. Uh,
mm,
it's a much cozier place to live if you see it that way, than if you see it as a pile, a huge pile of atoms. Uh, it's uh, it's not like that. We don't experience it that way. Thank God we don't. You'd be
yeah.
got to get past this pile to something I want to hug, and I don't want to hug atoms and particles.
Yeah, yeah,
You probably don't either. I
yeah.
suspect. I find myself saying things that sound kind of sunny, but or funny, but uh, yeah, I mean them. I'm pretty sure I do.
Right,
Uh,
right.
um, and as I said, I think earlier, we don't live more or less scientifically. We live more or less wisely, and wisdom takes into account all this connectedness and all the unknown or mystical aspects of what we know and what we don't know, and what we are capable of embracing and what we're reaching for, I think, pretty uniformly, although there are a lot of reachers who aren't reaching much. And, and,
Indeed, indeed. And
and
wisdom.
yeah, and we're living in interesting times, a lot of people would say. And the capacity of people who have incredible capacities to do wonderful things and to love and care and invent and grow in understanding and so on. Saying no to that and just saying, yes, I'd like to accumulate more.
Mm,
The capacity to do that, the capacity to ignore the capacities that could bring you happiness and connectedness and love and all the good stuff for the sake of piling up uh, coins and bills that have nothing in them of sustaining value is pretty disappointing. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about human beings and how can human beings do some of the things that they've been doing for a long time and seem to be
mhm,
doing in spades now. And you wonder, how is someone who's capable of caring for a fellow human being and raising them to adulthood and so on, wanting to waste their time piling up bank accounts and so on? How can that be attractive? But it sure is. We disappoint me. I'm sure I'm disappointing people too.
I I am currently undergoing a situation in my neighborhood where I am experiencing feelings of disappointment.
Mhm.
And I too echo your experience of looking at humans who are behaving in ways that are not loving and not caring and are not um, in any way seeming to be aware at all of our interconnectedness, of our inner
And it seems to
beingness.
be so easy to ignore it.
Um, and for me, a fundamental definition of being human is to recognize that each of our experience is different and to care
Mhm.
about what somebody's experience is. So to not to that's two parts. One part is to recognize that the experience is different. Two is to care what
Mhm.
the experience is. And it seems to me that many of us are forgetting what it is to be human. We're forgetting what it is to see each other and to care what each other's experience is.
And that's just heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And part of what you're doing and offering these keys to living well is inviting us to remember our connectedness, inviting us to remember what is meaningful. You mentioned love and giving and gratitude and generosity and humility. Um, so I'm
Sound
not
like a
sure,
preacher. What am I going to do?
but those are the words you mentioned. And if we can
I
reorient
know.
ourselves to those, then we can create, we can contribute to a better world. And in the ways of in the words of one of my teachers, it's, as you said, where are you? Where are you standing?
Mhm.
Where are you heading? And she offers, and what do you want to contribute? Yeah. And do you want to contribute love? Do you want to contribute justice? You want to contribute compassion, care? And if
If
not,
you can, yeah, you can live an alternative life. How much can I take? How much can I pile up? How much can I accumulate? How much can I control? How much can I manipulate? How much power can I have?
yeah.
Why does anyone think those are good roads to go down?
Well, I would say that they have succumbed to illusion and that they are operating in a world of illusion. And we can only hope and pray that we all wake up, that collectively we wake up,
Uh-huh.
collectively we engage. Um, in in my tradition and in my way of thinking about what's happening in the world, I feel like there's two things that we must do, and that is one, we must sort of reflect on where we are and what we want to contribute, as we've just said. Um, that we must connect to in this experience of multiplicity, in this experience of this intense struggle between the light and the dark, between a lack of humanity and humanity. It's important to spend time connecting to what we hold as sacred, to connecting what our highest values are, to connecting, if you're in a theistic tradition, connecting to the divine, um, to spending time, because if we can cultivate that awareness, that sense of unity, of divine oneness, then we can be in the presence of the multiplicity without losing ourselves, without
Mhm.
losing our humanity. So that's the invitation um, that I'm hearing in my tradition, and the invitation that I'm hearing in your advice
Mhm.
is love, care, connectedness, humility, giving. So these are points of commonality, and it's through these things that we can contribute to a world of hope and a world of love and work toward a world with justice and peace.
If I were to summarize the conclusions that I've come to in this little book here,
Hmm.
um, and in my studies through the years and reflections through the years, um, I, I just think that when people look at grief, um, naively, I think they see nothing but something to avoid,
Mm.
nothing, something to get over, to put behind you, to loosen the grip of it. And it's entirely negative. And it's just awful. Grief is just awful. And my reading is that we have emotional and other difficult reactions to what's happened to us. And people tend to think of those things as sort of like being hit over the head something to be avoided. And people think of emotions as things to be expressed. And I think of emotions as um, sort of like a pain in your head when something's going on in your head that you should pay attention to,
Mm,
or a pain in your knee. There may be an injury there, there may be something that needs attention. And you've got this wonderful physical system that signals you that physically you've got a need here, you've got a need there. And through modern medicine, we've learned a lot about how to read the signals that our body is giving us that point in the direction of promoting our health rather than further deterioration, injury, and the like. And I think of our emotional lives as doing the same thing for us socially, psychologically, um, in all the other dimensions of our life where we live consciously. And the idea that grief, when you go into the depth of it, and don't just express the things that you are feeling, but attend to how your hope, your hopelessness um, points in certain directions to what you need. You
mm,
need hope. Your alienation from other people, all kind, everything that these emotions, what the substance of what they express, as opposed to just express them so you can get rid of them, dispense them out into the world without doing anything in their light. I think grief is hopeful because it's telling you things that you need to do. Pay attention. The things you need to do socially, things you need to do for yourself physically, needs of things you need to do for you as an individual, for you as your family, for the people you care about, for the community that's been affected, and so on. If we came to see our emotions as like our physical aches and pains, pointing to aspects of who we are that need attention and need active response. They tell you what you need to do in conversation with the people who need to talk to you about the loss that you have in common. That tell you what you need to do to put your family back together in a new way. That point you in the direction of hope for yourself, hope for your loved ones who still live, hopes that the people who died had that you can use to shape life among those of you that survive the person and so on. If we stop seeing grief as just negative, but as um, a kind of an inner sensory capacity that can point you in all kinds of positive directions as you live the next days and years of your life, you've got a better hold on what grief is about. And it's kind of stuff I try to catch in the book.
mm. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom, the conclusions of your book. Thank you for inviting us to look at grief and all of our emotional experience as invitation to new life, new directions, new life within, new life in terms of the larger world. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your lifetime of work devoted to grief, and thank you for the great conversation.
Thank you. This has been very nice. I appreciate your having me on board.
And thank you to all listeners for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go, briefly, if you would pause and take one breath, reflect for just a moment on what stays with you from this conversation. May something you heard today help you reconnect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion, clarity, and courage. May you find your way again and again back home to the divine, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, please like, share, and comment on this episode. Please follow and subscribe to Beyond Names. To make an appointment with me, please visit habibboerger.com. Until next time, may you be light, may you consciously participate in growing your light, and may you share your light. Peace be with you.
And with you.
Thank you.